Minister Lawrence Wong.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the members of the House who have shared their views on this bill. Let me first reiterate that this is largely an administrative exercise. As Mr. Liang says, it is housekeeping. There is no change to the substance of our borrowing legislation, the overall borrowing limit, and the safeguards to raising the current limit. But let me clarify some of the questions and points that members have raised. Mr. Liang asked about the outstanding amount of securities under the LTBA and the GSA. As at 30th of September, we have $65 billion under the LTBA and $699 billion under the GSA. Both Mr. Liang and Mr. Louis Ng also asked about the rationale for merging the LTBA and GSA borrowing limits. Let me explain. First, with the introduction of Singer, we thought that it would be timely to consolidate legislation of government borrowings for non-spending purposes, so as to distinguish these from borrowing for spending purposes under Singer. So by pooling the LTA and the GSA together under the renamed Singer, this will emphasize that the borrowings issued under this Act are entirely for non-spending purposes. And this would also address what Associate Professor James Lim was saying. He had suggested to pool it together as one combined limit together with Singer. But from the government's point of view, for better governance and for better control of processes, we want to distinguish between borrowing for non-spending, which is done under LTBA and GSA, and borrowing under Singer, which is borrowing for infrastructure, which we spend. I think it's prudent and advisable to have different limits for both. But with between GSA and LTBA, both are borrowing for non-spending reasons, one for short-term securities, another for longer-term securities. And we felt that there is no need to distinguish so much between the two. Furthermore, over time, the processes for treatment of LTBA and Treasury bills and government securities have become harmonized over the years. And therefore, we see scope for pooling it together. Second, a combined limit under this renamed GSA will also provide MAS greater flexibility to calibrate the issuances and tenures of debt issuances based on market conditions. In fact, other countries like the US and Germany similarly manage their short and long tenure securities under a single limit. With this combined borrowing limit, we do not expect the proportion of short and long-term securities under the renamed GSA to be significantly different from today. This is because a large proportion will continue to be used to issue SSGS, which is mainly driven by CPF balances and its investment needs. And as Mr. Liang has correctly highlighted, the amount of SSGS issuances is expected to increase over time due to growth in our resident labor force and wages. The remaining borrowing limit will mostly be utilized by the issuance of Treasury bills and the SGS to support market development. And it is market demand and conditions that will influence the amount and the tenure of such debt to be issued. In particular, MAS will calibrate the amount and tenure of such issuances to meet the regulatory needs of financial institutions for high-quality liquid assets and to establish a robust sovereign yield curve to support the development of the SGD Singapore dollar corporate bond market. Indeed, it would not be in the government's interest to issue debt of certain tenures beyond what the market can reasonably absorb, as it would skew the interest rate curve used to price Sing dollar denominated financial instruments and result in capital misallocations. So to reiterate again, we are combining all the borrowings that are for non-spending purposes, CPF, market development, pooling it together under this renamed GSA. We believe it is prudent and from a financial point of view, provides better control to have this differentiated from borrowing for SINGA projects, which is borrowing which will be used for financing of actual projects, and that will be governed separately under the SINGA Act and with a separate limit. On Mr. Liang's suggestion for a separate borrowing limit for SSGS, I think he highlighted the need to provide clarity to market participants and analysts. Here, we do not believe there is a need for a separate limit to carve out SSGS. Because if the purpose is to provide clarity and transparency, indeed, the composition of borrowing, be it SSGS, SGS or Treasury bills, this will be published and will be subject to public and parliamentary scrutiny. And MAS will continue to publish monthly the breakdown of outstanding SGS and Treasury bills that are issued. Next, Mr. Louis Ng asked about the purpose of this borrowing limit. And if the governance over increases in borrowing limits can be further strengthened to reflect the sanctity of the borrowing limit and the severity of increasing or bypassing it. I think Associate Professor James Lim also alluded to this in his response. Let me clarify that there is really nothing sacrosanct about the borrowing limit. These are not permanent hard caps. In fact, the government reviews the borrowing limits periodically, and we will come back to Parliament to raise the limits through parliamentary resolutions where required. The most recent was in January this year. For example, as demand for SSGS grows due to rising CPF balances, then we will start to reach the limit. Likewise, demand for SGS and Treasury bills will change depending on regulatory and investment needs and market conditions. What's important to understand is that the key safeguard, the key legislative safeguard in the Government Securities Act is that none of these borrowings can be spent. Like I said, it's differentiated from SINGA borrowings. Under the GSA, all of the borrowing proceeds are invested. Therefore, such borrowings do not lead to additional debt burdens. Given that we already have such a legislative safeguard under the GSA, some may ask, why then is there still a need for a borrowing limit? Our view is that this borrowing limit, while it's not a permanent hard cap, serves as an additional layer of check and safeguards. It's useful for monitoring, and each time we get close to the limit and we need to raise the limit, the government would then have to come back to Parliament and get agreement to raise this through a parliamentary resolution. And thereafter, the President will act independently in her discretion to concur with this resolution. So with the merger of the LTBA into the GSA, there will not be any change to the existing safeguards and processes that we have in place today. Finally, Associate Professor Lim also asked about two clauses of the bill, Clause 20 on the acceptance of advance deposits from by the MAS and whether this unnecessarily ties the hands of the MAS. We do not believe so. Clause 20 does not hinder us from effective monetary policy at all today. Clause 24 on the right, reserving the right to refuse the sale of debt to any entities, yes, that's in place in legislation, but should such a scenario were to arise, the government will make clear its reasons for refusal. But in any case, we'll continue to review and update all aspects of legislation, and should there be new developments in the marketplace or new requirements, we will periodically update legislation where necessary. In summary, sir, this bill seeks to provide clarity on the government's debt profile and reflect that the majority of the government's borrowings will continue to be issued under the renamed GSA for non-spending purposes. I assure members of this House that our fiscal position remains strong with borrowings. We will review our debt limits regularly to ensure that we continue to borrow within our means and remain in a net asset position. With this, sir, I beg to move.
Any clarifications? Very good. Everyone is short and concise today. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many as of the opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
The Government Borrowing Miscellaneous Amendments Bill.
Committee stage, what day?
Now, sir, I beg to move that Parliament will immediately resolve itself into a committee on the bill.
The question is that Parliament will immediately resolve itself into a committee on the bill. As many as of the opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that clauses 1 to 29 stand part of the bill. As many as of the opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Bill to be reported. Minister for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to report that the bill has been considered in committee and agreed to without amendment.
Third reading, what day?
Now, sir, I beg to move that the bill be now read a third time.
The question is that the bill be now read a third time. As many as of the opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
The Government Borrowing Miscellaneous Amendments Bill.